Ben, you feel a little bit like the Lincoln lawyer right now, working out of your car in the midst of it's what's been a busy couple of days in terms of news about the Georgia State football program.
Yeah, there's no question. Certainly unexpected news nationally and regionally. But folks close to the program weren't necessarily shocked overall with Shawn Elliott leaving to return back to his home state and a place that he and his wife and kids have called home, going back to Columbia, South Carolina. Certainly the timing of it may be a little surprising for sure. But yeah, Georgia State football is looking for a new head coach for the first time since December 2016. So a lot to talk about. I know we're going to get into it, but yeah, a lot of Sun Belt turnover, and Georgia State's just the latest.
Well, let's talk about it because Coach Elliott obviously was the longest tenured Sun Belt head coach at this point after 7 seasons. You mentioned that it wasn't much of a surprise and it kind of started to feel a little bit expected at some point. Just talk us through why you believe this decision was made and particularly the timing behind it.
Certainly. What wasn't so much a secret, and it kind of continued to get a little bit louder really in the last 2 or 3 years. Head coach Shawn Elliott's wife and kids did not live in Atlanta. They did not make the trip from Columbia, South Carolina after he left the University of South Carolina to take the head coaching job. They certainly were staples at Center Park Stadium, downtown Atlanta, came down for practices and times that way. But as a family man myself who has a high schooler, I couldn't imagine, being away from my wife and kids and obviously the stress and life that we know is college football and being a head football coach. But I know that was taking a toll on him. He kind of broke down a little bit at a press conference in 2022, talking about missing his daughter's state championship cheerleading routine basically there and not being able to celebrate with his daughter live and in person because he was working there and had a game there and going back to the fall, his son had his first varsity appearance at AC Flora High School. And Shawn Elliott basically skipped out on an open practice for students and fans, and that kind of raised some eyebrows. And then a few weeks later, the Columbia Star comes out and says, "Hey, Shawn Elliott has been in every single football game for his son," and that was even more kind of curious because ultimately, he's traveling or not traveling with the team when they go on the road. He's not, working with the team that way. So when exactly is he working on it? All's good when life's good when you're winning, right? So the team sprinted out to a 6-1, start. And then the collapse happened, right? 5 straight losses and certainly just absolutely awful loss there at Old Dominion, double-digit lead, just completely blown apart and the way that team lost. But then they woke up, 3.5, 4 weeks later, went out to Boise, Idaho, and just thumped the crap out of Utah State and old friend Blake Anderson. So I think it was an interesting offseason and just the tenor around the program. I know for a fact that the transfer portal and losing some of his best players and some of his impact players weighed on him. Talked to some folks close to him and members and even former members of his staff. I mean, you lose 11 players to Power 5 teams the last 2 off seasons. That wears on you. I've heard terms amongst a group of 5 coaches where they feel helpless from tampering that we just know happens for good players. You recruit, develop these players, and then ultimately you get them to a point where they're kind of hitting their prime and pop, they're gone. They're gone, whether it's NIL promises or actual NIL money. Marcus Carroll, one of the leading rushers in the Sun Belt and in the nation, he skips out in the bowl game and he commits to Missouri on his first weekend. You have Robert Lewis jumps in the portal and pops to Auburn. Montavious Cunningham, the right tackle, goes to Virginia Tech. So ultimately, Georgia State was not able to retain that talent. But I thought at least this offseason he had gone into the portal and done something he really hasn't done and stepped out of his comfort zone, grabbed some guys that were from the metro Atlanta area that maybe he missed in on the first time around at a high school, now went back into the portal and they wanted to finish up their career and come home. Gone to places like Kentucky and Louisville, where he had seen success in 2023 as well, grabbing, Henry Bryant on the defensive line. So, the portal swings both ways for sure. And it looked like Shawn Elliott at least had kind of his staff had done a great job acquiring some talent. But ultimately, it sounded like the dam broke a little bit with him and his family. And he even mentioned it in the press release saying that ultimately he knew this potentially was going to be a step back for him professionally. But personally, this was the right decision for him at this time.
Definitely appreciate that perspective, Ben. It's just nice hearing about that kind of behind the scenes workings and how some of the writing might have been on the wall for him making an exit, and also knowing kind of the space that college coaches and the position that college coaches are in with some of the struggles at the Group of Five level, and especially at the Sun Belt with the transfer portal and some of the other changes that we've seen across college football. But you mentioned it, this is a guy who's been around for nearly half of this program's tenure as a football program. He's led y'all to 4 bowl wins. He's beaten Tennessee in an upset win and has really done a great part in changing and shifting the culture of this program. Could you maybe talk about that and how he'll be remembered positively in Atlanta for what he's done in the last 7 years?
Yeah, no question. I think you start positive, okay, and that's a great way to put it. Ultimately 41 wins in 7 years. There's some programs that say, hey, maybe that may not be good enough. Just to kind of give you guys some perspective, when he took the program over, Bill Curry coached for 3 seasons and won a total of 10 games. Trent Miles coached for the better part of 4 years and won 10 total games. So when he came in, he established really a toughness, talked about from the very beginning that this program was going to run the football and be a tough, beat you up kind of team, and really establish an identity. Shawn Elliott did that. He was a fiery competitor. Certainly, most famously, you see him going up and down and kind of shoving his players and pushing in kind of a playful manner pregame, getting guys fired up, and ultimately, I think the things that he has built from the lack of a foundation, if you will, back in 13, 14, 15, 16. There is a firm foundation right now for the next coach to build upon, and that's a huge credit to Shawn Elliott and his staff. His coaching tree certainly is all around the Power Five right now. He lost 5 assistant coaches in one fell cycle to Power Five teams 3 years ago. Lost his OC to Louisville, and now he's at Cincinnati this year. Lost another defensive back to Georgia Tech. So obviously, there was some success there. I think he averaged right about 5.8 or almost six wins a season in his tenure there with those 41 wins. So ultimately, he proved a few things for the future coaches and folks that are interested in this position is you can win here. There is a facility here. There is administration to support building and growing, a football program that still is in its relative infancy and has only been FBS since 2013. So you're talking about basically year 15 in total for the program. Led it to successes that it had never had before, and now really it's just having the next coach, whoever that may be, grab the baton and really pick it up and run with it.
Well, Ben, and I think to your point, and as the songwriter once wrote, the past is in the past at this point, and you started to go down that path talking about what makes this job at Georgia State attractive. What are some of those things that might attract, perhaps a top assistant at the Power Five level to want to come to Georgia State and build this program into the future?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different buckets you can look at it here. Ultimately, can you win? As I mentioned before, are there facilities that are Division I or FBS quality, and you check that box as well? You have administrative support. The president, athletic director, very supportive. Ultimately, with the football program and growing the football program, in a variety of different ways. And the other side is, can you recruit you recruit the area. The metro Atlanta area in the state of Georgia produces a tremendous and a wealth amount of talent. You just look up every college football roster and even NFL roster. You have Georgia ties and kids that are from there. Ultimately, too, even with the transfer portal, as it swings out, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it can come back as well, too, where you miss guys that maybe you're in on out of high school to go to a bigger program, don't play. You have the ability to bring them back. Certainly on the basketball side, you saw Ron Hunter do that for 4, 5, 6 years and have wild success in basketball. You can absolutely do that in football as well. The biggest thing ultimately, Shawn struggled and his staff struggled to grab Metro Atlanta talent, to be candid. Georgia kids a lot of times looked and maybe weren't engaged enough in their view, talking to high school coaches every Friday night, as I did, that Georgia State, hey, they would go and run to South Carolina and grab kids because that's where Shawn was from, or some of his assistant coaches had relationships there, or going to the state of Alabama, or going down to Florida, which, again, isn't bad, but ultimately you're a downtown Atlanta program. You have to go and make your hay, especially over half your roster when it's not from the state of Georgia. There's a lot of folks that perception becomes reality. So I think that's the humongous opportunity here, where ultimately there's a lot of things in place that were not in place when Shawn got here, that he's kind of established and created or corrected. I think it's a humongous opportunity for, whether, as you mentioned, a Power 5 assistant, Power 5 coordinators that have been interested in this job, or hey, a successful FCS head coach may look at it and say, I've worked with duct tape and razor wire over here. Basically, I can build in the Sun Belt, where Sun Belt programs are getting $2 million a year with their football contracts. So ultimately, there's an opportunity to build, and I think again, Shawn left it better than what it is, and I think there is a multitude from conversations that I've had. Candidates are very interested in this position, and whether they're from the state of Georgia or have ties to the state of Georgia, they want to come here and they want to jump in because they also see an opportunity, right? You succeed at the Sun Belt level, 2-3 years, you can launch yourself, as we've seen, to Power 5 opportunities and truly life-changing money.
As a former Georgia football player at the high school level, I agree with a lot of what you said there, Ben. But I think overall, it's going to be fascinating to see who takes over the helm of this program because of, like you mentioned, there's a strong recruiting base there. I think Atlanta in the future of NIL is going to have a lot of opportunities for student athletes as well. And then, of course, there's a head coach that's going to come in that's going to have to make the program a little bit more attractive as far as fan engagement and support. So I think it's going to be interesting to see who can maybe take this program to the next step after what Shawn Elliott was able to do. But we talk about head coaching candidates. We know some people have interviewed for this job already. What maybe profile or traits are you looking for as far as the next head coach of Georgia State, whether that's experience, the background, like you mentioned, maybe a FCS coach or coordinator? What do you think would be the best and ideal fit for this program moving forward?
Yeah, I think just ultimately somebody that's going to be relentless recruiting. Georgia State has a unique profile being downtown Atlanta, but also has obstacles that you have to overcome as well, right? It's a super crowded landscape between, you have, again, two-time national champion up there in Georgia grabbing some attention. I can't tell you how many, Georgia, folks, Georgia State alums who have season tickets at Georgia Tech or Georgia State or maybe, Falcon season ticket holders. So they're going to wait out and hold their money for Sundays instead of Saturdays. Or even Atlanta United. Soccer is big in Atlanta as well. I've talked to folks who have who have been Georgia State season ticket holders and said, you know what, I'm going to go to an Atlanta United match because, hey, we're playing ULM or Southern Miss or somebody that way. It's really trying to win at such a high level. So you have to find somebody that has a successful plan or has come from a successful pedigree, right? Someone that knows how to say, hey, I can build, what that program over there did. I look at a guy like Brian McClendon. His name's out there publicly several times. Guy that interviewed for the job was a finalist. That Shawn Elliott got the job in 2016. From that point, he went to South Carolina, was the OC there under Muschamp, went to Oregon for Mario Cristobal, went to Miami again with Mario Cristobal, and then has been at Georgia the last 2.5 years. Ultimately, guys like that, Del McGee, guy that has been at Georgia, has coached in the Sun Belt with Georgia Southern, was a super successful high school coach as well, that is not afraid to kind of dig in and really find the guys that are that next level down. You're not going to go get the 4-star and 5-star guys in the Sun Belt. It's just, we would cover recruiting long enough. It's just not going to happen. Ultimately, you got to find that next tier and find those guys and stay on their radar so they're not going to an AAC school or a Conference USA school or a MAC school, or being able to develop those guys who maybe only have high-end FCS offers, for example, and going and developing those guys and say, look, stay home, play in front of family and friends. Ultimately, don't go elsewhere. And how many times can your parents see you play? And there's going to be plenty of opportunity with the new coach that comes in. The roster is pretty balanced. Another credit to kind of Shawn Elliott as well. So you're not top heavy in one underclassman, upperclassman. And again, you still have a transfer portal in April. So you have a window here where we kind of evaluate the staff and go. But it's got to be a relentless recruiter, somebody who's super comfortable recruiting to the city of Atlanta. I think that's a big part of it. And quite candidly, as we talked about in that line before, Shawn Elliott kind of being a part-time resident of Atlanta, I believe hurt recruiting ultimately. And you got to have somebody that's familiar with the city of Atlanta and is happy to live here.
Well, Ben, you've been at the forefront of this news for the last couple of days. Appreciate you taking some time to come on and make sure you get some coffee and stay awake, as we can't wait to see you break this news in the days ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me, fellas. Appreciate you.